for the people that they are. There have been many of them now that are going back to the bottom of the Colorado Rocky Rivers, because in the Grand Canyon they now find that there are streams that are drying up. And in fact, the river that used to flow through the bottom of the Grand Canyon is beginning to disperse. It's beginning to break up. And many caves that were hidden beneath this water level are now becoming open. It is a place now where many strange things are happening, including anomalies seen at night and energy arrays that seem to be coming up out of the Grand Canyon itself that can be seen in the night sky. And a lot of activity is happening now in the Grand Canyon of our old world. What I'm simply saying is to you that even though we have come a long way with our science, and in America we're said to have one of the best educational systems around, that there is still a lot to be learned, and a lot of it is not being shared on a regular basis to the people. Because of that, we're going to take a look, not to challenge what is being said, but to possibly add to, because we feel that a lot of the scientists and topographers already know what you're going to learn tonight, but they're not releasing it to the public in general. The Earth has many different things, but in beginning to do studies, they find in the zoologists and the biologists, they refer to, again, animal life and how far and frequent that animal life can be, and they date it, and they have what they then call a term biological life. There are very interesting creatures on our Earth. The camel, which is said to be a very African fauna, yet the fossil remains of the camel can be found not only in Africa, but in India, in South America, and in our own state of Kansas, which one of the members mentioned today that he had recently been to. They have found fossil remains of the camel, yet they say that it originates only in Africa. What was it doing over here? And if the fossil remains start showing more than 2,000 or 3,000 years ago as being fossilized, how did they get here, and why is it only in one state, Kansas? The horse, which everybody takes for granted again, said to have originated in the Western Hemisphere, yet fossilized remains of a horse can be found in fossil beds in Nebraska, in the Bear Tar Pits, and also found in Asia and throughout Europe, the same type of a horse that we see now. Cattle and sheep are said to be domesticated only and can't live without living in herds nowadays, and yet sheep and so were found in Europe. Carvings of sheep were found in the caves throughout Europe and in the Stone Age, and huge buffalo herds that now roam America were said to have roamed South Central Asia. Buffalo herds, now said to have originated only in the Americas. The cave lion that's found in the southwest of America can also be found in Europe. Yet we found, again, no way that these so-called matings of this animal can take place against whole, huge bodies of water. When we begin to look at some of the flora, if you would, there's the banana, which everybody takes for granted. It's found in Mexico, Brazil, the Hawaiian Islands, and Florida, and most of Central America, including the West Indies. Yet it is a native of said to be tropical Asia and tropical Africa. The banana is generally seedless, cannot be reproduced by cuttings, and it has no tuber or root other than that which is on the tree, but not from the fruit itself, which means, again, how do you do something like that? How do the seeds spread unless you're leading to cultivation, unless someone takes it, plants it someplace else other than where it indigenously is found? They have found banana supposedly covered with ice, which means that it predated the Ice Age. And at this time, America was not supposed to be tropical. How is it there? Why is it there? Everybody takes wheat, for example, as for granted. Everybody has wheat cakes and wheat bread and so on like this. Wheat has never existed seemingly in a wild state, nor is there any real evidence to trace its descent from what is called previous fossil species. Wheat is found in Europe in 5 different varieties. Somebody had to work with that wheat to give 5 different varieties of it. It's been cultivated during the so-called pre-Sumerian age, and if you read Zechariah Sitchin and so book, the pre-Sumerian age means in Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia 1, where they had wheat. And during this time, of course, you had what was called an Ice Age. How could wheat have still existed during this particular time? And in 5 different kinds of grains, if you would. It's as though, again, somebody had made these grains up, 5 different varieties, and placed them in various areas over our planet, or at least that's one of the ways of looking at it. We have what is called a mixture of languages on our planet. And because of this, it's very hard, unless you do a lot of study, to be able to communicate with each other because everyone speaks a different language. We find now, of course, that there is a converge, if you would, of linguistics where people are beginning to learn and can have people who know one language and act as interpreters. The Phoenicians, from which we get the word phonics and phonetic alphabet, along with the people called the Carthaginians again, use signs for sounds, the type of language used again presently in the Eastern Hemisphere. And for the first time, according to modern anthropologists again, it was used in the Americas no more than about 100 or 250 years ago, someplace in between there. Yet there are many types of languages that are found to overlap. For instance, if you can speak native Hawaiian, and very few people can, and you can speak Gaelic or German, Baal, you'll find that you can understand the same similar language. In fact, there was a big fight that took place just prior to World War II when a group of German scientists, home-based again in Hawaii, and a group of Hawaiians were in a bar, and the German soldiers again took kind of an off-color joke. It was about a Hawaiian woman. And the Hawaiian guy jumped over and started a fist fight. There was a big brawl that took place. And when they questioned as to what happened, he says, well, what did this guy say to you? He said, we didn't say anything to them. We were talking amongst ourselves. But they understood enough of what the language of these German sailors who were speaking more or less Gaelic to know that it was an offensive joke. Yet they had never learned German, and the Germans had never learned Hawaiian. There is a lot of similarities, and even in dress, with the kilts that are worn, again, by the so-called Irish and Scottish, that are found again in Morocco and parts of Jamaica, many places like this. And there's a very interesting thing called a keening wail, which the women, again, in the islands and the women in parts of Africa would go at the death of a person. They would set up a loud wail, or moaning, if you would. And it was idea to honor the dead soul that this moaning or wail would continue. And it was supposed to last for 3 days, and no one is supposed to break it, or else the spirit would be in unrest, which meant if one woman gave up, it was only by the women, the men were not allowed to do this. If one woman gave up the wail, another woman someplace was supposed to take this up. The same practice was done in Ireland. It's called a keening wail, the keening and quickening of the spirit wail. Yet, none of these people knew each other, and where did such practices come? I'm going to cut through a lot of other substantiative things to let you see why I reach a possible conclusion on this to get to the meat of tonight's subject, but I will simply say, if you do a little research, you'll find that there are many anomalies, many strange things about our planet, about the people of the planet, and about the alphabet and language of the planet that makes it very interesting. I'll stop with this one. Many of us now are having a migration, or I might say an immigration, of people that are coming out of Latin America. They're coming out of Argentina, they're coming out of Mexico, they're coming out of Brazil, and they're coming to California, they're coming to the East Coast, they're coming all over in the United States. And the strange things you will see now when you begin to see the native, more or less mestizo or Nambazi that comes out of the South America, they look in many cases like Japanese people. And if you really look carefully, they have slant eyes, they're the same height. You will find again that their skin color is about the same. And if you listen to them when they get excited, they begin to, it sounds just as though they could be native Japanese or even Chinese. Now I'm saying this to you because you can observe this yourself. The height is the same, the skin color is the same, and even when they talk fast, the language begins to get on a tonality that begins to sound the same too. I'm suggesting that we may be closer to each other than we think. And if we're not for something holistic that happened, we may all be one people. In the Christian Bible, it refers to a time when the languages were confused and that the people were separated. And I'm thinking that some parts of that may be very true with a little research that goes along. When we also look at our earth, we hear strange legends and strange stories. The stories of lost Atlantis. I guess everybody in here could give a dissertation for at least 5 minutes about Atlantis. Said to be a continent that was in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. That's why it was called Atlantis. That this continent went down through a series of holocausts, and that the thing was pretty quick. It went down supposedly within a week's time, some say within 3 days' time. And therefore, the legend still persists, supposed to be brought forth by Plato and Socrates, Actually, again, it was taken from Solon, the Egyptian priest, when the Greeks were in captivity there in Egypt before they actually came in with Alexander and took over the area. These were legends and stories that did not just start in Greece, but were carried on by many people. There are legends about a continent that was in the Atlantic that is still held by the people in the Azores, and many people on, again, the west coast of Africa. There are all kind of things about possibly Atlantis. Very little is heard, but some about Lemuria, sometimes called Pan or Mu, and that in Lemuria, which supposedly existed again in the Pacific Ocean, was a continent that was larger than any type of water we have now. That at one time our planet was mainly mainly land more than water, where now it's 3/4 water. It's interesting too, if you look at the Pacific, you will find ridges, you will find islands. Of course, we know about the Hawaiian Islands, the Kwajalein, Saipan. There are many places and many islands dotting throughout the Pacific, some of which are very interesting. If you take a look at Easter Island, some 1,600 miles off the west coast of Chile, you will find again an island that has large statues upon it, statues that are said to be monolith. And nobody can understand how they got there because there is no connecting landmass. The statues are so strong and so hard in weight and tonnage that they couldn't have been taken over by any ship. And yet they've found 22, 44, and I understand now hundreds, because some have even been buried over in topsoil just on the Easter Island area. And some of them are not made of the indigenous basalt that is found on that island. The question becomes, how did these statues get there? If we begin to think in terms of a possible landmass or continent that was there and broke up, and this quarrying and stone was going on, and these are now left isolated from the bigger landmass, it can begin to make sense. If you also notice that one thing in common is held by most of the islanders when you start going back in their history, they all look African, or Negroid is a better way of looking at it now. There are many stories about Queen Kalakalani, Queen Lalakalini, and again, in the Hawaii itself was ruled by a queen and later on a king, that in the Fiji, and if you go again to New Zealand, any place you go, especially even into Australia, it's supposed to be a larger continent, all of these people look very Negrito. And that is a term that is used now by anthropologists, Negritos, that the indigenous people, almost in any place on our earth, if you go back far enough, look Negrito. Small, occipital lobe, they're long-headed, usually peppercorn or kinky hair, large lips, or what they would call now Negroid type of features. This is one thing that is in common no matter where you go. And even though this is the end of Black History Month, this is not where I want to just stop. But to let you know, there is still a common thread wherever we go on our planet. It is just, again, because of racism, and so some of these things are not liberally taught. But I'm telling you it's truth and can be easily verified with a little research. But another thing also seems to come to the fore. When they went to the North Pole, and they talked amongst people that were migrating northward from Canada, they called these people Eskimos. And they asked the Eskimo, in generally, why do you migrate further north sometimes when the weather gets worse? And they asked them, where did they come from? The Eskimo seems to be a composite almost of every race that we see on our planet, and yet lives isolated, or did until very recently, over the last 60 years, from the rest of the people on our Earth itself. The Eskimo does migrate north when the winters come. And they have been found with their igloos, what do they call them again, and some of the trampolines and paraphernalia that they have, far, far up, even past Baffin Island, and into the area which is known now as the iceberg area, which is a little snow crest, as you can see again at the planet, the white line that goes around the top, where there is a snow line, certain latitude that reach there. They asked them, where do they come from? And they said they came from the north. They said, well, of course you don't mean the north, because there's nothing up there but ice and snow. Where do you come from? And they say that their ancestors came from there. But they also found that when they watched some of these tribes of Eskimos, they would leave with very little game, some of their dogs and a few other animals, because of the harsh weather, they didn't keep too many animals. But when they come back the next year, they would have flowers, they would have seeds, they'd have more animals, where the animals had obviously propagated. And they asked them, well, how could you do this in the storm? We said, we came from the north. That up there in the north, there were many wildlife. They had seeds and game and flowers. Well, of course, they were laughed at because everybody understands if you go north, past Canada, you're not going to get seeds and grains and flowers and parakeets and cockatoos and things like this. One other thing began to rear a nasty head was during World War II. Many of the pilots who tried to avoid radar and some of the gunners, in order to reach to Europe, would go up near the poles. And in many cases, their planes crashed. And if they crashed, they were given provisions, of course, which keep them alive for about 7 days, and usually a cyanide capsule they take again, of course, if their life became too harsh to take. Well, what they found is that the downed sailors and the downed pilots, some of the shipwreck pilots, sailors again, would say that they were plagued by mosquito bites and sandstorms. That the biggest thing they had to worry about was not so much the further north they went about the snowstorms, but mosquito bites and sandstorms, and that the skies sometimes would be full of birds. All of this led to one conclusion later on, which was pretty much reached by a statement made in 1956 by Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd. When Admiral Byrd went both to the North Pole and later on to the South Pole in 1956, he made a statement. He said that this expedition has opened up a vast new territory, and that this expedition will actually be the most important one that ever has been done on the planet Earth that we know about. What he talked about as he went 2,600 miles into the South Pole and 1,600 miles into the North Pole, when he flew in an airplane, not by dog sled and all like this, he actually flew planes, that the further north that they went, the more that they found green vegetation, the more that they found even what looks like a giant woolly mammoth, the more that they found flowers, the more that they found everything else. And the same thing happened when they went deep into the South Pole area. What they stated was, and what they tried to hide, was that our planet does not have poles. And I even found out, which you can do some checking yourself, that there are no polar flights. Now, they might be now with some of these supersonic airplanes that go about now doing Mach 2 and Mach 3, but in most cases there were no polar flights. The flights that they called polar flights would be that a plane would take off from someplace in the United States, we're talking about now, would go up near the pole, but instead of going over the pole, it would go around the pole and then go to the area that was going to, whether it was there or not. That there are no polar flights. And one of the reasons they found that there were no polar flights is the same type of thing that's now occurring again on our Earth. Too many crashes. Now you're finding out that the planes are crashing because the electricity does not work. They're finding out now that the transponders and when you're looking at the radar equipment, no longer function. The gyro mechanisms do not function well. And the people were following, the planes were following the curvature of the Earth, and next thing you know, they crashed into the ground. An anomaly that is again, we say, beginning to happen as we speak now. What they found was that the Earth was not, as we have been taught, that there are no North Poles and South Poles, that all of the things were always in dispute from the time when the British explorer, and I forget his name right now, all the way to Admiral Perry and all like this, that they did not get to the North Pole. And there's a lot of debate for those things. That's why they have asterisks beside their names about discovering the North Pole. Metaphysics states and research states that there are no poles on our Earth. That the area that's supposed to be pole is a huge opening. That opening is at both ends of our planet. And that opening leads into what we now call the inner world. That there is a portion of our planet that we have not been told about that can be accessed either through the North or South Pole. And there are areas also that connected, as we should say, that get to be very, very interesting. Found that there was a satellite that was placed up in orbit that was called the ESSA 3 and ESSA 7. This is some time ago, in the again about mid-50s, and this photograph that you're going to see was one made by the ESSA 7 when a cloud covering that was generally over the North Pole was moved aside, and what was able to be seen was a distinct hole leading into the interior. This is something that is very hard to get. They say it was never published, but I give you a picture of supposedly the ESSA photograph, which shows distinctly an opening there at the poles. The same thing was repeated at the North and South Poles. The same kind of opening was seen. leading into the earth. The conjecture has been, and we will get more into that as we proceed in this series of the inner world, that many planets may possess the same thing. And the idea is that if one planet is hollow and our moon is solid, then we have a phenomenon that cannot exist. If ever we prove that our earth is open and hollow, then the moon must also be hollow, or it would crash into each other, because a solid and a hollow cannot stay side by side in a very balanced orbit. If this postulation holds, it sets up a whole new concept about our science. And this is why this is one of the reasons, not the only one, as you will find there will be many reasons, why this kind of thing has not been revealed. But this is, again, ESSA 3 and ESSA 7's photograph of supposedly the openings to the poles. Ancient ones have said for a long time that there have been people that lived inside the earth. If we hear about Orcus's adventure to the underworld, if we hear about Amenta and the land of Styx, by which there were said to be rivers and people that were believed in by the Egyptians and the Nubian people, here's another cross-section in general of the whole philosophy, with the dimensions being given of the inner side and, of course, the inner sun. Again, there have been numbers of books that refer to this concept, and, of course, whether or not we believe it is a matter of opinion. But there was a book put out by Marshall Gardner, along about the 1890s and so, called Journey to the Earth's Interior. There was another book put out not too long ago by a man by Emerson. It came out in the 50s, called The Smoky God, referring to what was said to be the inner sun, or proton sun, in the center of our Earth itself. There's another one which received a lot of acclaim, which you've probably heard about, The Hollow Earth by Dr. George Bernard, who also went to talk about Admiral Byrd and Admiral Peary's events and what was said to be found there, and the things that didn't seem to hold up about vegetation and fossil remains. There is one that hardly anybody has heard about called the Shaver Mystery. It was a book written by Richard Shaver. This came out in the early 40s, and it's been one of the most hidden set of books, because there was almost 8 of them, and many people don't even know that they ever existed. Recently, again, there was the Holy Tabernacle Scrolls by Dr. York, and also the Earth Chronicles by Zachariah Sitchin, which all refers to, again, the possibility of there being life forms inside the Earth. Many of the so-called hippies in the early 60s and into the early 70s again talked about what they called Alexander Tolkien's Middle Earth, by which a lot of trolls and little pollutions and so lived, and it was said that they were visited